up, peeps? It's Great White making it happen again today with some more Portal Nights. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I'm having a great day myself, and today we get to take a closer look at Hungry Hungry Portal Nights. This is the most recent game I made in Portal Nights using the new logic blocks, and it's one of the, I don't know, I'd call it intermediate as far as how difficult or how complex it is compared to, say, something like the arena. The arena was a little bit more complex than this. This was actually pretty simple, and I'm excited to show you guys how it works. We'll be able to see some examples of some redundancy that I used that wasn't necessary, that could have been refined and made my life much easier. So hopefully if you guys ever do a project that involves any of these mechanics or any of these circuits, you can save yourself some trouble through my trial and error. So, if you guys don't already know, just to explain kind of how the game works, a short tutorial on how this works exactly. These buttons in the center, these start the game. The game starts when these buttons are pressed. There is some stuff in the logic blocks that makes it so these can't be, well, they can be pressed anytime, but they only work after the game is over, which is after the last enemy is spawned. So if you press this, it doesn't matter if you keep pressing it, it won't work again until the game is quote unquote over. But yeah, it's a pretty simple way to do it, and I thought originally I had this concept where I would put the start up here and then you had to jump down, but it ended up being simpler and actually looking a lot cooler. I think having the landing pad in here, and it gets you back in the action a lot faster, so it's not as much of a penalty if you die. Still a penalty because it takes a while to respawn, but it's not as crazy as you know, having to run back into the place. It makes it a little bit more manageable, I think, if you die, and makes the game a little bit more fun. Now, once the button's pressed, there's about a 5-second countdown before enemies start spawning. And they spawn in a spiral. So one at a time, it goes in a spiral all the way up this tower of enemies. So for 100 seconds, there's 100 enemies that spawn. And they fall down, and you try to pull aggro with them, either by attacking them or not attacking them. If you just run near them, it'll pull aggro. And you try to lead them back to your square. There is no assigning of squares other than you just pick your colors. So if you and your friends are playing, you just decide on your own who's going to be what color, and then you just start pulling enemies that way. And you kind of jump across and try to aggro them into this little cavern here, which holds them down here with a couple traps inside too. Now, there are ways to sabotage your enemies, of course. These buttons right here, when you press this, it closes the door so enemies won't fall in, and it attacks them with some ice traps. So that's a cool way that makes the game a little bit more fun. It's not just pulling aggro from enemies and getting them in one direction. You can kind of screw with your friends, and this part especially makes this game incredibly fun. I had a blast playing this with Nikki Mon Elementals. Also, shout out you guys for being so awesome and helping me make the video. But yeah, this concept or this mechanic rather, is super fun. I was going to use... Okay, sorry. The next part that we're going to get into is where it gets a little bit confusing. What happened is that we needed to count the enemies that get killed, and what we ended up doing is these things up here. When the game is over and the last enemy is spawned, there's about a 20-second countdown before the game is technically what would be called like in an overstate, like it's the game is done. And when that happens, this unlocks. This door is removed, and these buttons are exposed. You can kind of see there's buttons behind those. Those are the buttons you press to start counting the enemies that you've killed. And basically, the reason we have these doors on here is that pressing that button initiates your part of the counting. Pressing that button says, okay, yellow player is now counting. And then it brings the doors back up so that other players can't press their buttons. Because originally what we were going to do is we were going to say, while this button is pressed, or excuse me, we were going to have trapdoors down here, or oh my goodness, not trapdoors, but pressure plates. We were going to have pressure plates down here that recognize when the enemies are here, and by seeing if there is an enemy down here using pressure plates, we would have it keep killing them until they were all dead, and then move on to the next player and just do it automatically. So that way we wouldn't have to have you press a button to start counting. But sadly enough, the enemies don't activate pressure plates. So if Portal Knights, if you're listening to this, gosh, it would be so great if enemies activated pressure plates. It would make so many things possible in the game that just aren't possible right now. It would really make things great. So if you guys can make enemies activate pressure plates, oh boy, Ooh boy, that would be neat. But whatever, no big deal. But yeah, what we ended up having to do is have when you press the button, while this button is down, it starts killing these, and while this button is down and an enemy dies, it adds a tick into here, which kind of adds up over time. Now, what we ended up having to do is that in my enemies tutorial, if you guys check out my previous videos, I have an enemies logic block tutorial that shows just how enemies work. And what we ended up doing is using the same method for counting that I showed in there. Each of these enemies is hooked up over here. This is like where the main logic stuff is happening, and then behind these is mostly just the time, not the timer, but the counting. Like this light system that we have going on. I can actually show you guys a couple things with this and how it works. Let me grab a button really quick. We'll do a green one and a red one. We'll throw a block here and here. Throw our green button there. Throw a red button here. Now the way that these work is it's kind of that input counter. I did an input counter video as well. So if you guys want to check that out, you can get an idea of how exactly that works. But basically what's going on... Ooh. Sorry, I'm trying to decide where it is this stuff happens. Ah, here it is. This goes back into here. This isn't technically how this works. I'm just doing this to show you guys. This goes back into here. Okay, cool. So this basically is the same input counter, but I just did it with 100 lights. And it works just the exact same way. It's just a lot bigger than the one I did a tutorial of. So each of these lights, basically, this part of the SR latch, which is kind of like a timer. So if this is lit, that means the SR latch is off. Or on rather, and if this one's lit, it means it's off. So we can look and see this bottom right light is on, so we can see, oh, this SR latch is on, this one's off, whereas all the other ones are opposite. So if I press this button again, you can actually watch it work from back here. You can see that light moving down the chain. So that's kind of how that works. And we combined this with over here, each enemy is hooked up to its own SR latch. So that's what this big tower over here is. Each of these SR latches, these two NOR gates leading into each other, each of those is hooked up to an enemy. And when you start the game, there's a delay, a chain of delays that starts somewhere. Gosh, I don't remember where it starts. I think it starts at the bottom somewhere. One of these corners, maybe? No, I think it's in the center somewhere. There it is, right? No. Well, gosh, it starts somewhere. But anyway, each of these delays and these delays and these delays, all of these are chained together. That's how I created the enemies spawning one at a time. They're all set to a 1 second countdown. And when the game starts, basically we press this button, and these buttons send a signal over here. And I did this. This is not the best way I could have done this. I could have, I've since refined the way I do short pulses thanks to Cherry Bomb, one of the commenters on a lot of my videos. He's a super awesome guy, and he showed me a much simpler way to do a pulse. But what I ended up doing is I did 2 timers, and one timer turning on is based on a condition that says the other timer is not on. So as soon as you press this, both timers are turned on, and then when this timer is now on, but this one, and this one is only turned on when this one's off, then it can turn itself off and not keep turning itself on. And I know that's super confusing. I've made a video about how to do that as well. I might do a second one showing you guys the simpler way, but there is a video explaining how that works if you guys check out my previous videos, how to turn a constant pulse into a short pulse. I did a video on that, so if you guys want a little bit more in-depth explanation, you can check that out. But I did that. I took that method, and I made a short pulse, and I used that short pulse to activate the chain of enemies spawning. So as soon as you start the game, there's a short countdown. I believe this is a countdown for, what is it? Ooh. Is it just a 1 second? Oh, it is just a 1 second countdown. Excuse me. It is a 1 second countdown, and then enemies start spawning. And then they kind of go up this chain. And then once the last enemy spawns, it sends a signal down into this, which is my game over timer. This timer right here says the game is over. So once the last enemy spawns, that last delay that spawns an enemy then sends its signal to this timer, which counts down for 20 seconds. Once that 20 seconds is up, it activates this timer, which says the game is over. And this then turns off the game is started timer. So the button that the timer that this button starts, this end of the game timer turns that off. So that's when you're able to press this button again to start the game if you would like. Now, once the game is over, the reason we have the game is over timer is because this game is over timer causes it to open up these doors. So now you can start counting your enemies. And it also makes it so these buttons work again. So if you press the button, you're able to play the game again, so you don't have to reload the map to be able to play the game again. Another cool thing that we did is that once the button is pressed and the game is started, there's a timer right here that goes into the bottom of this this counter, this enemy kills counter. And once the game is started and the end of game timer is not on, this timer is constantly sending a signal into the bottom of this, which means when you start the game a second time, it'll empty out how many kills you have and start fresh, so you guys can keep playing over and over again without having to restart or reload the map. So it's pretty cool the way it works. I'm pretty happy with it. The logic blocks we used for killing enemies actually is pretty cool. So when you press that button, I can kind of show it really quick here. Let's go over to the yellow one. No, the yellow one's been modified. Let's go over to this red one. So if we knock back these, this is our button that we press. And basically you press this button down and it activates this timer. And this is actually a pretty cool thing we did. This is one of the cooler things we've done with the logic blocks. So when you press this button, it activates this timer, which has a 10-second countdown, and then this timer sends a signal back into the button. So for 10 seconds it'll be pressed, and then once that's up, it'll release the button and it'll open this up. Pretty cool. But the other cool thing is that when this button gets pressed, it goes into this AND gate. So this AND gate is looking to see that the button is pressed, and then there's also this delay. This delay doesn't have anything hooked up to it, and it's on a 2-second interval. So every 2 seconds it'll send a signal, and only when this button is pressed and this signal is sent will it then forward a signal from the AND gate into this short chain of delays. They kind of lead into each other, and these delays, this short chain of 4 delays, lead into these traps, these ice traps. I think they're ice. Yeah, small ice cannon trap. And they lead into input number 2, which only fires once. So every 2 seconds when this button is pressed, and every 2 seconds when this delay activates, because it turns on and off when it's nothing's plugged into it, just to show you guys what I mean. While there's nothing plugged into this, off, on, off, on. So every 2 seconds that goes on and off. And while this button is pressed and that's going on and off, it sends a pulse, and these all fire once. And the reason we did that is because when you kill enemies, if you kill more than one at a time, if you kill more than one enemy at once, it'll screw up the counter, and you only get credit for one enemy kill. So if you press it super fast together, there's a chance if they die at the same time, you won't get credit for both the kills. You only get one. So by spreading out these shots and having them shoot in a circle, I'm able to minimize the amount of times that happens and make sure everybody gets credit for their kills. Now, there is some loss. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect method. There's not really, I can't find a perfect method for getting this to work without using just an enormous amount of blocks. But it does work somewhat. We can make the assumption through the law of large numbers that everybody is experiencing the same amount of loss. So even though you are losing credit for some of them, not like if you add up all the numbers at the end of the game, it doesn't add up to actually 100. Usually it adds up to around 75. We can make the assumption that everybody's experiencing about the same amount of loss, just again through the law of large numbers. But that's a pretty cool way that we were able to do the counting. Now here's the cool thing: is you're saying, okay, 20 seconds. That's not nearly enough time. This timer is only 10 seconds rather. that's not nearly enough time to be able to count all the enemies that die. And here's the cool thing that we did, is this timer is actually reset by an OR gate that's getting a signal from when enemies die. So whenever an enemy dies, this big chain of OR gates we have up here, this big chain of OR gates is where the signal comes when an enemy dies. So when an enemy gets spawned, this SR latch is turned on, and it spawns the enemy. When the enemy dies, it then resets the SR latch and sends a signal up here. So they send a very short pulse signal into this big chain of OR gates. So this chain of OR gates will send a signal every time an enemy dies, and I have it reset this timer every time an enemy dies. So when an enemy gets killed while you're counting, the timer that will turn off the counter gets reset. So that way, while you're counting, you don't have to keep repressing this button over and over and over and over and over again. As long as an enemy dies within 10 seconds, it'll reset the timer and continue to keep killing enemies. And then when it goes 10 seconds without killing an enemy, then it will turn off and you'll be able to go and start counting for the next player. So that's one of the coolest logic things we used here, is just this short. It's like 4 logic blocks combined together to make this really, really awesome bit of circuitry that really serves our purpose very, very well and very efficiently. Now, that's pretty much all of the different stuff that there is to show you. It's really a pretty simple game, a simple project. It took forever to put together because, as you guys can see, there are a lot of logic blocks. It's just we're doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Look at all this. It's really, what is it? It's really like 1, 2, 3, 4 different things. It's really like 4 different things and then a 5th thing up here, but it just looks like so much because there's 3 layers of each of these things. So it looks like a lot more than it is. Each of these is very simple, and this is where I screwed up. So this is probably a lame way to end the video on, but here I'm going to show you guys where I made a mistake with this build. This is our counter that we used. And I was such a big dumb dummy. This is one of the coolest things in the game, but there's 2 problems here. I used NOT gates leading into our SR latch so that we know when the SR latch is off. So basically this AND gate looks to see that this, let's start over here. This AND gate looks to see that this SR latch is on and this one is off. And if that's true, it turns this one off and turns this one on. And that's the logic that sends it down this chain all the way down to the bottom. The part where I was such a big dumb dummy is that I used the NOT gate going into the SR latch instead of the other part of the SR latch. I could have saved myself, each of these is 100. I could have saved myself 100, 200, 300, 400 blocks. I placed 400 logic blocks I placed and hooked up, and I didn't need to. 400! Wow. Wow. What a pain in the butt. Gray White, you're such a big dumb dummy. Oh, so silly. But you know, you live and learn. So if I wanted to redo this, I would, instead of hooking this NOT gate into this AND gate, I would instead just use this part of the SR latch into the AND gate and save myself this whole entire row. Make my life much, 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 much easier. Ooh, it would have been so much easier. It would have been so much faster, but, you know, so is life. Thus is life. No big deal. The last thing I wanted to mention is that this game is not without flaws. The system in Portal Knights is flawed in some regards, and the main issue that we run into with this map is with these counters. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. 400 different lights. What happens is that if you play this game with 4 players, you are going to run into some issues. Issues that I cannot resolve. I do not see a solution for it. I thought very hard about it. I tried to figure out ways around it, but I cannot. When you are counting 1, 2, 3, 4 players, when you get to the 4th player, it will glitch out. It will get to the bottom, and some of the lights won't light. Some of the lights won't actually turn on. So if you're filling this up, it will work technically. So technically, they will be on, and it won't continue. It won't just like turn the same light on and off. It'll keep filling up, but some of the lights won't be lit. So you can still technically count. It's just some of the lights in between won't be on like they will over here. So like, for example, over here, if you get a bunch of kills, down here, as it's filling up, as it kind of gets down to the bottom here, you'll see like This should be the next one that lights up. Maybe this one won't light, this one won't light, this one won't light, but this one will, and this one will, and this one will. And, oh, actually, there we can see an example of it. Yeah, sometimes it just breaks, guys. So it still fills up. This is still 20 kills, but for some reason, these 3 aren't lit. They should be. Why aren't those working? I don't know. I don't get it. I'm not sure why that happens. I can't figure out a way around it, but if you guys can, please let me know. I would love to hear your solutions. But yeah, that's the whole entire build, guys. I hope you like it. It's a super fun build. It's super fun to play with friends. So I highly recommend you get some friends together and try this, because when you start sabotaging other people by pressing these buttons and then trying to steal their enemies and pull them back to your chamber, ooh, it gets fun. It gets so crazy. But yeah, guys, make sure you like this video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I would appreciate to have you subbed. I'm trying to make a career out of this someday, hopefully, and you subbing really does help make that happen. But yeah, leave a comment if you guys have other ideas for cool things we could build. Leave a comment if you have any suggestions, praise, concerns, whatever you want to comment. I would love to talk to you about it. But you guys have been a pleasure as always, and I hope you do have just the best kind of day. See you later, dudes!